We are in the middle of our online Servant Leadership Summit. We're about to enter the second hour, and we've been having some tremendous conversations with amazing authors and experts. We are using the hashtag SLS2015 today, and I've noticed, I was taking a look at my phone, I've noticed that there are lots of tweets going out and even some graphics. As we start this next half hour, we have the Twitter handles of our two authors, Mark Miller and Cheryl Bachelder, on the line. And a couple other housekeeping items. We will share these slides later for everyone's use. We also will have recordings of each of these 30-minute segments so that you can listen and learn again and share these recordings with others. So thank you so much for investing part of your day with us. I'm thrilled to see we have nearly 500 people on the line who are participating with us, and I know that in individual organizations there are some folks who have gathered together in offices and are broadcasting live to larger groups even than are represented in our numbers. So if you are part of an organization today that is watching and listening together, I'd love to give you a shout out, and you can type that in the question panel, and I'll share that as we enter this next hour of content. Before we move on further, I'd also love to reintroduce my co-host for today, Karin Hurt. She's the founder and CEO of Let's Grow Leaders, a prolific blogger, a speaker, and also has a book coming out next year that's behind me on the wall, although I don't know if you can read it. It's Winning Well. So thank you, Karin, for your service to this group today. I would love to take a moment to introduce Mark Miller again and also introduce Cheryl Bachelder, who's joined us. We like to call this half hour. This is the chicken half hour. We have Cheryl as the CEO of Popeyes, and we have Mark Miller at Chick-fil-A, and it's a lot of fun as a team to serve both of these amazing experts. Cheryl has been the CEO of Popeyes since early in 2007. Is that correct?
Correct.
And she's been named by CNBC's Jim Cramer as one of his 21 bankable CEOs, referencing the amazing stock price turnaround that you've engineered at Popeyes. Cheryl's book is Dare to Serve. It's one I don't know if you heard that Mark was referencing just a few moments ago in his most recent read. So I have some shout outs here. There's some folks at AppleCare who are listening in a group. We have some folks at the Virginia Department of Corrections Division of Education. We have modernservantleadership.com on the line, and Ben's been putting some graphics out all morning. Thank you, Ben. We have Cummins Inc. with a group. We have several groups at Piedmont Healthcare in Atlanta, Georgia, and also the LEE Leadership Institute that has a group. We have a Xerox team with Tabana. So it's so amazing to be able to call in and learn together across the country and around the world today. So again, Mark Miller from Chick-fil-A, author of 5 books, including his most recent book, Chestnut Checkers. And just so thrilled to have the two of you with us and to hear the two of you have a great conversation. And I'm going to turn that over to Karin and to Cheryl and to Mark.
Okay, so thanks so much. So as we start this conversation, I wondered, why is servant leadership so important in the quick service business?
Cheryl, good morning. I'll let you take a shot at that, and it is a pleasure to meet you, even though it's virtual. I look forward to our first human flesh-to-flesh, face-to-face meeting, but it's a pleasure to be on with you this morning.
Thank you, Mark. I'll call you one time. One time I met Dan Cathy of Chick-fil-A, and he called me his partner in poultry. So I'll call you today my partner in poultry.
Sounds good.
I'm honored to be with you on this call. So the topic about servant leadership and quick service, I hope what Mark and I can do is just give some practical conversation around how to apply servant leadership in your workplace. In our business of quick service, most of our businesses are governed by a business called franchising. What that means is our brands are represented by people who have invested in the business as small business people. I became fascinated with franchising about 20 years ago. It's a phenomenal way to put people into business and lower risk. But interestingly, most of the franchisors who own the brands don't get along with the most important people, the franchise owners who run the restaurants. So my passion for this came in wanting to challenge our industry to put the franchisee first in everything that we do, to measure our success by their success. That is our version of servant leadership.
Terrific.
for us, I think it's similar, although there are a few differences. All of our restaurants are company owned, and then there is a franchisee, but it's not a traditional franchising model because we own the assets and we own the real estate, the equipment, and so there's a little bit of a difference in the model, but we believe beyond a success is linked to the success of those individuals and those restaurants. And so everything we do at our support center is to either serve those men and women who are in the restaurants or to serve those in our corporate office that are serving those individuals. And I would even broaden the question just a little bit to say, I think it's important in quick service, servant leadership, but I think it's important in the world. It is a superior form of leadership. And I think the data is slowly emerging. It's still countercultural. I think it was countercultural over 2,000 years ago when Jesus first offered the idea. He said, not so with you, but those that want to be great leaders have got to be willing to become servants. And so it was a crazy idea back then. Many consider it crazy today, but it's a superior path to sustained results. And so if there were no other reason to do it, it is an amazing business strategy.
You know, Mark, I find it interesting. When you ask people who their best boss in their life was, they always describe someone who served them well. And I like to challenge each of us as leaders. Why would we then not turn to the people that work for us and say, how can I best serve you? It seems only logical that their best performance would come from our decision to serve them well. So I think what you put out there is a great challenge. This isn't about the restaurant business alone. This is about any leadership role. You have the opportunity to create the conditions where people would perform their very best work. And that would mean you putting them in the circumstances to bring out their best.
Good. Okay, so in a large organization, how do you embed the value of servant leadership beyond the corporate office? And Cheryl, for you, that's got to be even more tricky of how do you share that value across franchise owners? So I'll start with this one.
Cheryl?
I'll be happy to start with the franchise side of it. We actually call this the chain of influence at Popeyes. John Maxwell says all leadership is influence, and I love that quote because it reminds us that it's not authority, it's influence, whether the people work for you or whether the people are franchise owners. Leadership is influence. So our responsibility as leaders is to positively influence our franchisees and help them to see the opportunity in front of them to be servant leaders. Frankly, it's quite simple. We had to serve our franchisees first to inspire their restaurant teams well. That's really the turning point in our chain of influence, is when one is served well, one turns and wants to serve others well.
Yeah, thank you, Cheryl. Karin, just to build on that, when you talk about embedding, one of the strategies we've employed for decades, before we even had language for what we're discussing today, is we really do try to select men and women who want to serve. And we think that certainly helps because we're in the hospitality business, but it really helps because that helps form their leadership bias. Embedding it is critical, but so much easier if you're starting with someone who has a predisposition to serve. And that's true not only at our corporate office, but it's true in our restaurants. And then I guess the other thing I would say, because again, it's a multifaceted strategy that unfolds over decades for how you embed this. It's been mentioned here. Cheryl just said it. We've got to model this. We've got to serve well. We need to select people who have a predisposition there. And it was mentioned in the last half hour, I think there are some skills that if we're not careful, we'll assume people have skills. You can talk about vision all day long, but do your leaders know how to cast vision? Do they know how to communicate vision? You can talk about engagement. You can talk about team building. You can talk about any facet of leadership. And if we're not careful, we make the assumption that people bring that with them. And so one way we embed this, both corporately and in the field, is we continue to look for ways to provide training and resources, whether those be internally created or third parties that we'll introduce to the organization. We find that a lot of times it's not an issue of the heart, but it's an issue of the hands. There are many men and women who really want to be a servant leader, and I know it may sound crazy talking to seasoned leaders, but they don't know how to lead. And so we're trying to figure out appropriate ways to come alongside them.
Good. So now I would like to just ask you about the challenges that you faced as you've worked to really implement servant leadership at Popeyes and at Chick-fil-A.
Well, I'll throw out one, Cheryl, and then I'll let you go. Cheryl's already said it. The first challenge is for us to lead well and for us to serve well. We believe that what's in the field is a reflection of leadership. And when we're having trouble out there, we got to look in the mirror. And so our biggest challenge to creating this servant leadership culture are our own leaders. It's me and the men and women that I sit around the tables with every day. We must lead well first. And I think that's our biggest challenge.
I also think we are challenged by skeptics who've never seen servant leadership executed well. And as a result, the skeptic says, well, certainly servant leaders are good for charitable organizations, but they couldn't possibly turn up the numbers in a public company or in a private family company. Performance, they miss the performance side of servant leadership. And so I constantly remind people that serving the people in the enterprise well includes performance. Because how on earth would we create a prosperous, thriving environment where people have the opportunity to grow and get promoted and see great success if we don't have performance results? So I think the skeptics need to see the performance to be convinced that this is, in fact, a credible path to a prosperous organization. And then maybe they can see the benefit of serving people well.
Let me throw in another challenge. Cheryl, I don't know your numbers, but for us, we still have relatively high turnover. And the way that creates a challenge, we've got about 80% of our restaurant employees, they are actually the employees of that independent operator, but about 80% of them are 20 years of age or younger. And we love the energy and the vitality and the youth and the exuberance that you get from a young workforce. But you also have lack of experience, particularly in leadership, and you've actually got turnover. So it takes a step of faith for a restaurant operator to invest in a young person. One, you're not sure that it's actually going to pay out. We call it a bet on leadership, and you don't know how long they're going to stay. And so we're actually trying to showcase our operators who are getting the results that Cheryl talked about, because they're willing to make that investment, they're willing to place that bet on leadership. I had a story just recently, and one of our operators said that a team leader came to her and said, now you know that this other leader is preparing to leave, so we should stop investing in their growth. And that operator said, no, they've only got 6 more weeks for us to pour into them before they leave. And so that's the mindset that we're trying to encourage, the mindset we're trying to cultivate, that those team members, they are not a cost to be managed. They're really a gift to be stewarded. And how can we invest in them? But that's a hurdle. That's a barrier. The pressures on the business are ever increasing, particularly the pressures on the P&L. And if you look at leadership development as a cost, you'll have a real hard time creating the kind of culture that we're talking about.
Right.
Well, you use the word culture. The culture that we want to create for young people today is a culture that's investing in them like no one has ever done so before. Our young people today don't come from strong homes, strong education, strong communities. Their experience in our restaurants might be the first time they've ever been loved on by somebody. The best general manager I ever met in a restaurant, I asked her why she was so excited about her job, and she just looked up and said, because I'm a minister, I'm a teacher, I'm a mother, I'm a counselor, I helped them get their grades up. She had 8 possible careers that she considered part of her job of leadership. And I just love what Mark said, because this is what we do in the restaurant industry. We give people their first work experience. And my goodness, if we could make them feel loved, cared for, trained, developed, even if they're only with us for a year, it may set them on a course that they could have not otherwise reached. It's really, our business is a stepping stone if we think about it that way.
Really helping them see this bigger part of their job description as really serving and helping these young people grow. Wonderful, wonderful stories. So I would like to ask each of you to share one short story that you really think exemplifies the success of servant leadership in your organization. Does one come to mind?
So I'll do a quick one and then hand it back to you, Mark. We have a franchisee named Mark Renna. His picture's on the screen. And the reason I wanted to quickly share his success is Mark decided to change his own leadership to change the course of his restaurant company. He owns about 15 restaurants in our system, and he realized he was managing them like they were P&L, not people. And the first restaurant he visited with the new Mark in mind, he looked at his people and said, "How are you doing? What's going on in your life?" And the first person looked back at him and said, "Mr. Mark, why aren't you asking me about the P&L?" And he said, "In my heart, I realized how important it was for me to change my focus from the P&L to the people, and I will never again start by asking about the P&L." Mark today has the highest engagement scores I've seen yet in one of our restaurants. His people now know how much he cares, and that's enabling them to care about their restaurant and their guests.
So Mark is really seeing that play out in the results. The results are going up, not just the employee engagement results, but the actual business results as well.
And the actual business results as well, absolutely.
Yeah.
Mark?
Well, let me pick up on that theme. Our success stories are every day, every transaction, every time one of our guests is greeted by a fully engaged, enthusiastic team member, when the food is hot and fresh and the service is surprisingly fast. If you choose to eat with us in our dining room, that you experience hospitality like you might experience at a 5-star white tablecloth restaurant. It's when you thank someone for their service and they actually say a heartfelt, "It's my pleasure." Those are our success stories, and we're trying to cultivate thousands and thousands and thousands of those in restaurants across the country every day.
Terrific. And it's interesting how consistently you see that playing out no matter which Chick-fil-A you're in. I know the one near me has constant cars all the way wrapped around it because it's attracting, people are attracted to that level of service.
Well,
So,
we're trying, and that's what success
Becky.
looks like.
Great. Yes.
We have, and this one comes from Michael. He's wondering how both Popeyes and Chick-fil-A have documented the financial results and the customer-centric cultural results of leadership development. We're getting some echo on the line, which is new, so I'm not quite sure where that's coming from, if anybody can help. So talk a little bit about the results of servant leadership.
So, Becky, for Popeyes, we're a public company, and our results get published every quarter. In fact, this week we'll report our third quarter results, so it's very visible to the marketplace. Over the last 7 years, our sales have consistently been up. Our same-store sales have been up every single year. Our restaurant profitability is up 75% during that time frame. Our market share among chicken quick service restaurants is up 70%. Our new unit openings are over 100 per year in the United States, and then we're all cultural metrics, like measuring our people engagement, our franchise. Not sure what that is, but there are metrics behind this that I think leading indicators of our future success is, are we constantly improving metrics of our culture?
You see me making faces. I'm having some weird audio disturbances. I don't know if that's across the entire event at the moment. Mark, did you want to speak to that question?
Sounds good here, I think. Okay. Although the numbers are slightly different, I would agree with Cheryl. Sales, profits, customer satisfaction, I mean, the numbers support the strategy, but it's actually more than a strategy. We're trying to be true to who we are. It is a strategy, but it's who we are, and we're trying to challenge our leaders to show up, be authentic, be genuine, be who you are. And yes, there's a skill set associated with it, and we want to be sure that we do our part in transferring those skills, but we probably couldn't change if we wanted to, because it's the culture we've actually created here, and the results, as Cheryl said, continue to bear testimony to the fact that servant leadership works.
Thanks so much.
I just want to add to that, Popeyes has tremendous respect for Chick-fil-A and their results. And I want that to encourage all of you on the line to try experimenting with servant leadership. If you admire another company who's getting great results using a method that you respect, then why on earth would you not want to copy it, right? There's no harm in copying great ideas. And so, I hope that Mark and to some degree our companies turn around with just the evidence to encourage you to put these principles into work in your organizations.
Yeah, we call that benchmarking.
Yes.
We do a lot of it.
Super. So here's a question. Ricky is wondering how you manage resistance to a servant leadership culture from independent operators or from franchise owners.
Well, if you believe that it actually drives positive performance results, you don't have to look very far. You look at the results. And those who don't emulate these principles struggle to deliver cultures in their restaurants that are highly engaged, and they struggle certainly to give good service to their guests. So when it's a driver performance, it's pretty easy to point to those executing the best practices and say, model those. Or maybe, in franchising, maybe you've chosen the wrong business path. If these are not your values, as Mark said, you have to be who you are. You have to be authentic. And if you're not authentically interested in serving people well, then maybe the restaurant business is not for you.
And anything there, Mark?
I think Cheryl is on it. We just have to help people be who they are, and again, although our systems are slightly different, we do a lot of selling and not much telling. Management and leadership practices are at the sole discretion of our independent restaurant operators. We cast a lot of vision, we share a lot of success stories, we share a lot of best practices, we share the phenomenal results, and at the end of the day, the men and women who operate our restaurants choose how they will lead, and our role is to be sure we paint an accurate and compelling picture of what servant leadership can provide.
Thanks. So I have a question that came in from Heather, and I imagine she's thinking about the fact that quite often in the industry that you work in, there's probably turnover, and Heather is wondering how a servant leader can approach letting an employee go.
That's a question that I probably get asked very frequently by skeptics of servant leadership. One of the first things they say is, well, then you don't fire anybody, right? You don't end any relationships. Well, when I met Colleen Barrett at Southwest Airlines, she said that when you don't have a good culture match, you encourage those people to become your customers, not your employees. And that really was provocative to me, is to say, look, we do have a culture. We do believe that this culture drives the best performance results. And if over time, if you've been given the opportunity to shift your thinking and your behavior towards that new model, and you've decided not to come on this journey, then the most powerful thing we can do for the enterprise and the people who are here is to suggest that you work somewhere else. That it's a kind of tough love, like you think about with teenagers, right? It's just to say, look, there are ground rules, there are important principles and a purpose for what we do for a living, and we'd like you to come along with us, but if you can't, we'd welcome you to be a lifelong customer of Popeyes.
So let me just add, I've talked to a lot of leaders who struggle with that same issue, and I asked them to reconsider the paradigm. And I actually wrote a blog post on this entitled, "Are you leading a team or a family?" And a lot of people talk about family, and I'm not a fan of that. I think leaders lead teams, and there are expectations, performance expectations to be on a team. Now, you can still have community, genuine community, even deep love for your fellow team members, but if you're coaching a team, let's take baseball as an example, and the second baseman can't catch ground balls, it's incumbent on you to replace that person, or ownership will ultimately replace you with a new coach who will replace the second baseman. And so I think it's an important distinction, deep and abiding sense of community. A team perform better, but it is a team, it is not a family. And so I think I've had leaders tell me that that's been helpful to them to think about how you let somebody go. You have to actually be able to catch ground balls if you're going to play second base.
That's a really helpful comment. Thank you so much. We only have time for a couple more, and there are so many questions here that are fantastic. Brian asks the question, market share and P&L are, of course, important, but he would love you to speak to the improved quality of life for the employees in the businesses that the two of you are representing today. Perhaps you could share some of that with us. What quality of life is improved when there are serving leaders or servant leaders in organizations?
Well, I think leaders create the environment for work, and so a good environment is a good quality environment. A bad environment leads to people not enjoying the time that they spend at work. We all today spend a lot of time at work. What we have found helpful in that case is to help people discover their personal purpose for work. I can't tell you why you lead or why you came to work, but it's really important for you to know why. And until you wrestle that question, you probably do come half-heartedly to the workplace and less enthusiastic about the job. And we have found that once people discover their why for leadership, they show up far more effectively, and they're far happier in their work and their life balance. And so we run an exercise, which you can find on my blog, Serving Performs, called Journey to Personal Purpose. And we transfer that responsibility to the individual to determine why they come to work and to bring their very best.
So let me quickly add to that. We've been looking for the last 5 years at this question of what makes a high-performance organization. And you mentioned my most recent book, Chess Not Checkers. It's our attempt to distill what we've learned over about 5 years into several key practices, and I'll mention just one of them, and it's this idea of winning the heart. And so when you talk about the quality of life, one of the best practices we found in high-performance organizations is they foster dreams. And imagine how engaged a person is when he or she believes that their leader really does want them to win, and not just win at work, but to win in life. And so we're actually kicking around this idea. We're challenging our restaurant operators because, again, this will be their choice at the end of the day. But we said, what if your restaurant became known as a place where people's dreams come true? Now, maybe it's just a next step, but what if you help them make their dreams come true or set them on that path, help them on that journey? I think that's a quality of life issue, an engagement issue, and probably a retention strategy as well.
Thank you. It seems that we have come to the end of this half hour. It went far too quickly. Mark, I think you're wrapping up an hour of being with us today. Do you have any closing remarks as you leave and John Stallworth is getting ready to join us?
Well, Becky, thank you for hosting this. Cheryl, it was a pleasure to talk with you, and I look forward, as I said, to meeting you face to face. I would just encourage our listeners to be a servant first and to think others first. And if you and I can cultivate the ability to think others first, a lot of amazing things can happen.
Thank you so much.